Well, good morning. My name is Jeff Lindsay. I'm senior pastor here at Meeting House Church. Monday morning, which means Monday morning meditation, a time where we can pause. Folks can share a few thoughts and ideas about what their life of faith is all about, what their faith in Jesus is all about, and their trust in God and what it does for them. If you're a part of Meeting House Church, you know that we have just begun a series called Just Jesus. That's what we're going to be focused on as we travel together through Lent. Just Jesus. So we thought Monday morning meditations could be focused on stories about Jesus, favorite stories about Jesus, and how those stories, those events impact our life still today, 2,000 years later. The story I thought I would share is the story of Jesus walking on the water. It's one of those spectacular, miraculous experiences that the disciples had where Jesus walks on water, defies the laws of this world by walking on water. And of course, if you know the stories of Scripture, Jesus does that all the time. In some of his healing stories, in some of his miraculous ways that he shows up in different circumstances, casting out demons, recognizing and knowing information before he could know that as a human. Jesus, because of who he is, he's God incarnate with us. He works outside the normal boundaries of this world that most of us have to operate in. And so this story of Jesus walking on the water is one of those stories that's captured my imagination since I was a little kid. There's a couple of versions of that story, one in Matthew and one in Mark. And I kind of like telling the story with both of those stories in mind, both of those versions in mind. They kind of all start at the same place. The disciples and Jesus have just got done feeding the 5,000. They've just done this huge, miraculous feeding with a little boy's lunch. And Jesus decides he's going to pause for a little while on the mountainside as the crowd disperses, and he's going to pray. He's going to reconnect with God. And he sends his disciples in a boat to cross across the water to the other side. And he says, I will meet you there. I'll catch up with you. And so the disciples get in a boat and they start across the lake. They run into a storm. Jesus on the hillside sees them in that boat facing that storm. In Mark's version, they are straining against the oars. That's how much wind there is, how much storm there is, how many waves there are. And Jesus, seeing them struggling, he decides to walk out to them on the water. In the midst of the storm, in the midst of the waves, Jesus walks out to them. In Mark, it says that as Jesus was about to pass the boat, the disciples call out to him. In Matthew, Jesus is walking towards the boat. The disciples see him, they recognize him, and they call out to him. Well, the end of the story is that Jesus comes to them and he speaks to the wind and the waves, and they're quiet. The wind stops, the waves smooth. He commands the storm to stop, working outside again the boundaries of this world. And they're all thinking, who is this man that even the wind and the waves obey him? But in the Matthew passage, there is a real personal part of the story. Yes, Jesus comes to them in the midst of the disciples' need. Yes, he speaks into the wind and the waves and he calms the storm. Yes, that'll preach. There's some great story there. But in the Matthew passage, there's this moment in the midst of the wind, in the midst of the rain and the storm, where the boat is being buffeted. Jesus comes to the disciples walking on the water, and Peter, the apostle Peter, calls out to Jesus, Jesus, if that's you, invite me to come and walk on the water with you. And Jesus doesn't hesitate. If you're willing, Jesus will invite you into the storms of life. He'll invite you into tough places, knowing that he'll be with you all the way. And Peter steps out of the boat and begins to walk towards Jesus. He's now walking on water too, doing in the presence of Jesus, with Jesus' help, the miraculous. Like Jesus invites us to do. to do miraculous things in his name with his help, with the power of the Spirit. But it's a real life story. And Peter's a real life person. And even though he's enjoying this moment where he's doing something that he should not be able to do, and only because he's with Jesus can he do it, he also recognizes where he is, in the middle of a storm, walking on water. And that reality overtakes him, and he gets afraid. He takes his eyes off Jesus and begins to sink into the water. And he's afraid he's going to drown. And he yells out to Jesus, "Jesus, save me." Now, Jesus could have been really disappointed. He could have said, Peter, we could have had so much more fun if you'd have just continued to believe. If you'd have just continued to trust me. But you took your eyes off me. You decided to look at the storm around you, and look where you are. And Jesus could have said, well, too bad for you. But that's not who Jesus is. That's not how Jesus keeps coming to us. Even when we fall short of what God desires for us, God keeps coming to us. This story tells us that Jesus reached out his hand and took Peter and got him to the boat. And as Jesus gets into the boat, again, the storm ceases. I love this story. When I think about our sermon series now through Lent, Just Jesus, I'm compelled to agree. It's just Jesus. What can we do? What can we experience? How can we be used for God's glory? If we would but follow Jesus, if we would just muster the faith that we have and trust Jesus, what might we see? What might we experience? What might we do in making a difference in the world? So, my friends, I invite you to join us here at Meeting House Church as we preach through this theme of just Jesus. But I certainly invite you to come back each Monday where we're going to continue to tell stories that will inspire you and encourage you to think about who Jesus can be, longs to be, desires to be in all of our lives. Blessings on your Monday morning. Blessings on your week ahead as we take one more step, one more day closer to the celebration of Easter. Bye for now.